The stone steps spiraled downward into darkness, each one worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. My boots made no sound. I had learned to move like that long ago, in places where noise meant death. The air thickened as I descended, heavy with the scent of burning wax and something sharper, iron, raw and metallic. I stopped at the final step, letting my eyes adjust. The chamber stretched out before me, half swallowed in shadow. Thick columns held up the arched ceiling, their surfaces carved with scenes so eroded by time they looked more like ghosts than figures. Between those pillars, pools of candlelight quivered and shivered, cast by dozens of tall beeswax candles arranged in concentric circles. Their flames bent and swayed as if the air itself was breathing. In the center, a man knelt on the cold stone floor. His wrists and ankles were bound with rope so tight, the skin had turned a sickly purple. A strip of cloth covered his mouth, though the muffled sound of his breath reached me, fast, shallow, desperate. Around him, robed figures moved in slow arcs, their heads bowed, their hands clutching small brass bells that chimed in a strange rhythm. They chanted between the chimes, Latin words that rolled and broke like waves against the walls, in tenebris veritas, in darkness, truth. I felt each syllable in my ribs. The candles closest to the bound man dripped rivers of golden wax, pooling at his knees. The heat must have been unbearable, but he barely flinched. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow as if searching for something, someone to pull him out. And then my breath caught. Standing just beyond the ring of light, half hidden by a pillar, was a figure I knew. Broad shoulders, the way his head tilted slightly when listening. The stance of someone who had seen combat and survived. But something was wrong. He was not moving like himself. The man I had traveled with for 2 days had a certain economy to his movements, the precision of a professional. This figure was looser, the joints bending at angles that made my gut clench. I leaned just far enough to see the rise and fall of his chest. Too steady. The rhythm did not match the room, did not match a human heartbeat under tension. A flicker of candlelight slid across his face. His mouth was not moving, but I heard him breathing, or thought I did. It was faint, almost a sigh, but there was weight in it, like the exhale of something vast, confined to a narrow space. I froze, every muscle tight, the back of my neck prickling. One of the robed figures passed between us, obscuring my view. When the path cleared, Tommaso was looking directly at me. No expression, no acknowledgement. Just eyes that did not belong to the man I knew. I gripped the pistol at my side, my finger resting just outside the trigger guard. My heartbeat was too loud in my ears. Every instinct I had was telling me not to step forward, not to draw his attention. Yet the bound man in the center was seconds away from whatever fate these people had prepared. The chant grew faster, the bells ringing in shorter intervals. Wax hissed as it hit the stone, the smell of it mixing with the copper tang of blood. Shadows leapt along the walls, distorting the carved figures into shapes that looked almost alive. My breath slowed, deliberately now, the way it had before breaching a door in hostile territory. I let the tension coil, waited for the moment. But before I could move, Tommaso stepped into the circle of light, and the way he moved told me with absolute certainty that whoever or whatever stood there was not the man I had been traveling with. The snow had not started yet, but the wind coming off the mountains carried that particular bite that told you it was close. I sat in my usual booth at Eddie's Diner, the one by the window with a view of the 2-lane highway cutting through the pines. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered, the red glow bleeding across the glass, pooling faintly on my coffee cup. I had been coming here for years, ever since I got out of the service. Small towns have a way of holding on to their people, even the ones who have seen too much. My mornings were predictable: black coffee, always black, scrambled eggs, rye toast, and a slice of pie if Eddie was in the mood to bake. I liked the quiet here, the kind of quiet you cannot find anywhere else. A man stepped in, bringing with him the smell of rain-soaked wool. He scanned the diner with the kind of precision you only learn in certain lines of work. When his eyes landed on me, he did not smile, just gave a short nod and walked over. His voice was low, clipped. I gestured to the empty side of the booth. "You found me." He slid in, setting a plain leather satchel on the table. The waitress poured him coffee without asking, small-town courtesy, and he waited until she moved away before unbuckling the flap. Inside was a folder, thick, bound with twine. The paper was cream-colored, heavy stock, not the cheap office kind. The Vatican seal was pressed into the cover, gold leaf catching the neon light from outside. "You've been summoned," he said. "Immediate departure." Took a slow sip of my coffee, the bitter edge grounding me. I thought I was out of that game. 3 men have gone missing in a restricted section of the archives, highly secure. Your expertise is required. I flipped the folder open. Grainy photos showed a long corridor lined with shelves, the kind of thing you would expect in an old library. Except the shelves were filled not with books, but with locked iron cases. In one image, the case doors hung open, empty. Another showed a scorch mark on the stone floor, jagged and strange, like it had been carved by heat rather than flame. My eyes stopped on the final photo, a man, blurred, as if moving just as the picture was taken. His face was turned slightly, but there was something about the posture, the angle of his head, unsettling. I asked. The messenger's gaze flicked to the window. I waited for more, but he only took a sip of his coffee, letting the silence stretch. I pressed. Not for me to say. You will be briefed in Rome. All. In my time with the military, it always meant 2 things. 1, the situation was worse than anyone wanted to admit. 2, there was something about it that could not be put on paper. The wind outside howled, rattling the diner's front door. I thought about my small cabin up on Hunter's Ridge, the firewood stacked neatly against the wall, the half-finished novel on my nightstand. I had traded in my rifle for a life that made sense. But when the Vatican came calling, it was never for something simple. I closed the folder, the weight of it pressing against my palms. "What's the timeline?" "Your flight leaves tonight," he said. "Pack light." He finished his coffee in one swallow, set the cup down, and stood. At the door, he paused, the neon light painting his face in alternating red and shadow. "Be careful who you trust in Rome, mister. Not all of them are on our side." The bell above the door jingled, and he was gone, leaving a faint swirl of cold air in his wake. I sat there for another few minutes, staring at the folder. The diner's old clock ticked above the counter, each second marking the distance between this quiet morning and whatever waited for me across the Atlantic. The first time I saw Gabriel Holt, he was leaning against the black sedan that had been assigned to me for the night. The engine was still running, purring in the cold Roman air, exhaust rising in thin, ghostly ribbons. He wore a charcoal overcoat, the collar turned up, and leather gloves that creaked faintly as he adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. I approached with my duffel slung over my shoulder, the faint scent of gun oil hitting me before he even spoke. It was a smell I knew well, one that clung to your skin if you had spent years cleaning rifles in the dark. He glanced up, and that smile, half friendly, half unreadable, spread slowly across his face. "You must be Graves," he said. His voice had that low, unhurried weight of someone who had seen far too much and learned to speak only when it mattered. "That's me," I replied, offering my hand. The handshake was firm, the kind that told you the man on the other end could hold a blade just as well as he held a pen. But there was something else. Something in the way his skin felt too warm, like he had been standing in front of a furnace. And the faintest scent, sharp and metallic, threaded through the gun oil. We slid into the car, the leather seats cold against my back. The streetlights strobed across Gabriel's face as he drove, carving his features into alternating planes of shadow and light. "You've been briefed?" he asked, eyes fixed on the road. "Only the essentials. Missing persons in a restricted section. They mentioned a special guest." His lip curled at that, just slightly. Guest is one word for it. The way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. The hum of the tires on cobblestone filled the silence, punctuated by the occasional tap of his gloved fingers against the wheel. As we passed under an archway, he started talking. Not about the case directly, but about the history of the Vatican archives, specific corridors, and rituals that were supposed to have been abandoned centuries ago. The strange thing was, some of what he mentioned wasn't public record. I had trained in those archives. I knew what was documented and what wasn't. And yet, here was Gabriel Holt, recounting the exact number of steps from the third sub-level stairwell to a locked chamber that only 2 living archivists had access to. "How do you know that?" I asked. His eyes flicked toward me, just for a second, and there was the faintest curve of amusement at the corner of his mouth. "Old habits," he said. "I like to keep track of places people want to forget." The air inside the car felt heavier then, like we had driven into a pocket of thicker atmosphere. My pulse slowed, the way it does before you breach a door on an operation. At a red light, Gabriel reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The leather cover was cracked, the edges darkened by years of handling. He set it on the console without looking at me. "You might want to read page 12 before we get there," he said. I hesitated. The paper inside was yellowed, brittle, and the ink had faded to a brownish red. Page 12 contained a hand-sketched sigil, something between a serpent coiling through a ring and a man's eye half-lidded in sleep. Beneath it, in blocky handwriting, were 4 rules. The last one read, "Do not turn your back on him after midnight." I looked up. Gabriel was watching me, the light from the street lamp catching in his eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw them reflect. Not the usual pale glint of light in a human iris, but something deeper, like embers banked in a fire. The light turned green. He drove on. We reached the Porta di Ferro, the iron door, just after midnight. The moonlight washed the Vatican's stone walls in cold silver, and the faint echo of our footsteps seemed to linger longer than it should, as if the air here was thicker. A man in a simple black cassock waited by the entrance. His face was sharp and pale, his eyes ringed with fatigue. Without a word, he handed me a rolled parchment tied with a crimson cord. The scent hit me first, aged parchment, mixed with the faint sweetness of resin, like incense trapped in the fibers. I untied the cord, the knot stiff as bone, and unrolled the parchment. The surface crackled softly, the edges brittle with time, and, written in deep, deliberate strokes of ink, was a numbered list. The first few rules made sense in a military kind of way, strict, clear, and absolute. Do not touch the iron-hinged doors. Avoid speaking your name aloud after midnight. Never step beyond the third archway without an escort. But as I read further, something shifted. The rules became stranger. Do not break eye contact if you encounter the pale archivist. Should you hear your own voice calling from behind you, do not turn around. If you see the candles burn blue, cover your ears and do not breathe until they return to gold. My pulse slowed. These weren't the kind of instructions you gave to protect against human threats. These were written for something else. I glanced up at Gabriel. He was leaning casually against the wall, gloved hands folded, watching me read. "Some of those aren't for you," he said. His tone was light, but it landed like a cold weight in my chest. "What does that mean?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting in that same unreadable way. "Some things down there, they have their own rules." I went back to the list, the candlelight from the corridor dancing over the ink. The seventh rule stood out more than the rest, written in smaller, tighter script, as if the writer was afraid of it. "Do not acknowledge the man with no shadow." The man in the cassock cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "Once you cross, these rules are binding. Break them, and the church will not intervene." I folded the parchment and slipped it into my jacket. Understood. As we stepped inside, the sound of our boots on the stone floor seemed amplified, echoing far down the passage. The air was cooler here, and with each step the faint scent of resin grew stronger, mixing with something metallic that I could taste at the back of my throat. We passed the first archway, and the shadows along the wall seemed to stretch toward us, as if curious. Gabriel's stride never faltered. "You've been here before," I said. He gave a slow nod. "A long time ago." "The place doesn't change. The people do." There was something in the way he said people that made me think he didn't mean only humans. The second archway loomed ahead. My fingers brushed the folded parchment in my pocket. The rules sat there like a weight, each one a warning I didn't fully understand. We moved deeper, the sound of our steps now slightly out of sync with our movements, as though something else was pacing us just out of sight. My instincts flared, the same feeling I used to get when a mission was about to turn. Gabriel glanced sideways at me, his eyes catching the dim light. "Just remember, Graves, some doors open both ways." The third archway rose before us, its keystone carved with symbols too worn to read. The corridor beyond narrowed, the stone walls closing in like a throat. The air was heavier here, damp with the scent of old water, and something faintly metallic. That was when I heard it. Faint at first, like the rustle of dry leaves. A whisper, threading through the silence, just beyond the edge of comprehension. The syllables were fluid, sharp, carrying the cadence of a language I did not recognize. It was not Latin. Not Greek. Not anything I had ever heard in the field. I stopped. The sound seemed to notice, curling closer. Gabriel paused ahead of me, glancing back over his shoulder. "You hear it," he said, "not a question." "What is it?" "Vocal resonance. Old walls carry old voices." His tone was casual, dismissive. But the whisper did not sound like an echo of the past. It sounded deliberate. I strained to catch a word, and that was when it shifted. The language broke, twisting into English, and the voice was no longer strange. It was familiar. It was my mother's voice. She had been dead for 12 years. "You left me." The air turned sharp in my lungs, and the faint taste of iron coated my tongue. My hand instinctively went to the cross hanging under my shirt. "Keep moving," Gabriel said. His voice was firmer now, edged with something that was not quite concern. We pressed on, the whispers receding but never fading entirely. That was when I heard another sound, soft, irregular, like fingernails dragging through something wet. It came from inside the wall to my right. I slowed, placing my palm against the cold stone. The vibration was faint, but there, pulsing with each scrape. The cawing sound grew louder. A drop of something dark and viscous slipped through a crack in the mortar and landed on the back of my hand. It was warm. The metallic tang in the air thickened. Ahead, Gabriel had stopped under a hanging oil lamp. His face was half in shadow, eyes fixed on a painting that hung crooked on the wall. The frame was tarnished gold, the canvas warped with age. The painting depicted a man kneeling before an altar. His eyes were unnaturally large, glistening, as if painted with real moisture. And as I stared, I could have sworn those eyes shifted, just slightly, catching the lamplight. "They say he was the first archivist to vanish," Gabriel said, almost to himself. "Some believe the eyes still see." The hair on my arms stood on end. I took a step back, and for a fraction of a second, I thought the figure in the painting looked at me, not with curiosity, but recognition. I blinked, and it was gone. The whispers returned, closer now, and beneath them came a low, wet breathing. The sound pressed in from all sides, as though the walls themselves were alive. "This isn't just old voices." He met my gaze without blinking, and then he smiled, that same smile from before, the one that managed to be both welcoming and unsettling, and started walking again. We emerged into a wide chamber lit by a ring of candles. Their flames burned steady and gold, but the air was cold enough to bite the inside of my nose. The stone floor was polished smooth, worn down by centuries of feet, yet streaked in places with darker stains that time had not erased. At the center of the room knelt Father Moretti, a man I had met briefly at the surface. He was muttering a prayer under his breath, the rosary in his hands catching the candlelight with each movement. The tension in his shoulders was visible even from here. Gabriel slowed beside me, his gloved hands resting lightly on the grips of his pistols. He did not speak. Neither did I. The temperature dropped further, sharp and sudden, like walking into a freezer. My breath misted in the candlelight. That was when the flames changed. Not flickering, but hardening, each one locking in place like a sculpture of ice. The light turned pale, then colorless. A faint crackling filled the air, followed by the scent, ozone, sharp and electric, like the moments before a lightning strike. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. Father Moretti froze mid-prayer. His head lifted slowly, as though pulled by some unseen force. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes widened, not in terror, but in something closer to recognition, or perhaps awe. "Father," I called, my voice low. He did not respond. The air around him shimmered, distorting the space like heat rising off asphalt. Then, in a single breathless moment, he was gone. No motion, just gone. In the space where he had knelt, the rosary fell, the beads scattering across the floor with a sound far too loud for so small an object. Beneath it, burned into the stone, was a symbol, intricate, circular, made of lines so fine they looked etched with light itself. I stepped forward, crouching to study it. My training had taken me through the Vatican's deepest archives, where records went back to civilizations most people had never heard of. I had never seen this mark before. It was beautiful in a way that was unsettling. Geometric perfection, laced with curves that seemed to move if you looked at them too long. There was symmetry, but also something wrong, like it belonged to a logic beyond human comprehension. Gabriel stood over my shoulder. "Do not touch it." I glanced up. "You know what this is?" His eyes flicked to mine, then back to the mark. "No one in the Vatican has the full record. Some say it predates the oldest empires by millennia. Others claim it does not come from Earth at all. The air shimmered again, but this time it was only for an instant, gone before I could be sure it had happened. The candles flared back to life, their flames melting back into gold. The warmth returned, but it felt artificial, like a stage light switched on after a blackout. I looked at the space where Father Moretti had been. The absence felt heavy, wrong, as though the room itself knew something had been taken from it. Gabriel straightened, his shadow stretching long against the wall. "We should move. This place remembers." I pocketed one of the fallen rosary beads without thinking, the cold of it biting into my palm. As we turned toward the next corridor, I caught myself glancing back. The mark still glowed faintly, the light pulsing in time with my heartbeat. My muscles moved before my mind caught up. My hand went for the pistol at my side, the familiar weight sliding into my grip like an old friend. I shouted, stepping into the open. My voice was swallowed by the rising chant, but his head turned anyway. The boy at the altar whimpered again, pulling against the ropes. I could see the skin of his wrists burning where they rubbed against the fibers. "Let him go," I barked, leveling the weapon at Gabriel's chest. Gabriel's smile didn't falter. Michael, always so certain about who needs saving. My finger tightened on the trigger. "You brought him here. You knew exactly what this was." He stepped away from the boy, slow and deliberate, hands out to his sides as though indulging me. "And you think that makes me the villain?" His tone was almost conversational, like we were back in a briefing room, not surrounded by chanting figures with teeth like broken glass. "You've seen them," he continued, gesturing to the crowd, hollowed. "And you think keeping them alive in your world is mercy? No, my friend. This is mercy." Before I could reply, the air cracked with a deafening roar, the sound of stone under strain. The floor shuddered. The candles bent and snapped, their flames extinguished in an instant, leaving the room lit only by the altar's smoldering glow. The boy screamed. Gabriel moved with impossible speed, yanking him upright with one hand. In the other, he held a blade so black it seemed to drink the light around it. The shot hit center mass, knocking him back a step. But he didn't fall. The wound bled, then smoked, the flesh knitting together before my eyes. The smell hit me, sulfur and scorched iron. The room exploded into chaos. The robed figures shrieked, lunging toward me and jerking inhuman motions. I dropped two with quick, clean shots, but there were too many, and they didn't fall like people should. Gabriel's skin was changing, darkening, hardening, his features stretching into something monstrous. Horn-like ridges pushed from his brow, his teeth lengthening into curved daggers. His voice deepened until it seemed to vibrate in my chest. "You think I serve them," he growled, nodding toward the creatures. "I serve him." The way he said it, capitalized without needing to be written, sent a ripple of cold through me. I demanded, backing toward a wall, keeping my gun trained on him. "The one who waits beneath the altar stones, the one who will unmake the false order of your precious church." His gaze flicked to the boy, "and the chosen will stand at his side when the undoing begins." Before I could move, he drove the black blade into the boy's chest. The scream was brief, cut off as the boy's body convulsed, eyes rolling back. The ropes fell loose, though no one had cut them. I fired again, the shot cracking loud in the enclosed space. Gabriel staggered, but the hole in his chest sealed almost instantly. Steam rising from the wound, the chanting figures surged forward. I switched to short bursts, the muzzle flash lighting the darkness in strobe-like blinks. White teeth, pale hands, the glint of the blade. Gabriel dropped the boy's body to the ground with a dull thud, then came at me. The floor trembled with each step. I fired point blank into his face. He only flinched, one eye closing for a moment before reopening, the wound already sealing. The heat in the room spiked. The smell of burning sulfur coated my tongue. My ears rang with the roar of gunfire and the shrieks of the creatures. I dove behind one of the larger stone columns, reloading in the cover it offered. Stone chips rained down as something heavy slammed into the other side. "You could join me, Michael," Gabriel's voice boomed. "You could stand beside him when he rises." I stepped out from cover, firing into the mass of robed figures blocking the exit. They fell, but more kept coming, dragging themselves forward with shattered limbs. The ground beneath the altar cracked. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. Something massive shifted in the darkness below, and for a moment I thought I saw a hand, if it could be called that, press against the stone from underneath. Gabriel turned toward it, dropping to one knee. "My lord," he whispered. I took the shot. The bullet hit his shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He roared, lunging at me. We collided hard, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. My pistol clattered across the floor. His claws raked sparks from the stone where my head had been a second earlier. I rolled, grabbing the weapon, and fired until the slide locked back. Gabriel staggered, but did not fall, his monstrous grin splitting wider. The hum deepened, the cracks widening. Whatever was below was getting closer. And then, just as suddenly, the ground stilled. The hum stopped. Gabriel froze, mid-step, his head snapping toward the altar, like he was listening to something only he could hear. His grin faded. "Not yet," he murmured. In the next heartbeat, he was gone, vanished into the shadows at the edge of the chamber, leaving only the smell of sulfur and the boy's lifeless body cooling on the stone. The chamber had become a living nightmare. The air was thick, choking, electric, as if the entire room were holding its breath. Every flicker of the torchlight danced over moving shapes that were no longer men. The robed figures surged from the shadows, eyes milk white, jaws slack but dripping with black saliva. They didn't stumble like mindless corpses. They moved with an eerie, coordinated precision, their heads jerking in the same rhythm, as though responding to some unheard pulse. Gabriel stood in the center, his massive form eclipsing the altar's dull glow. Wounds from my last barrage still smoked on his skin, but they sealed with a sickening smoothness. Bone reknitting, muscle reweaving, until there was no trace of injury at all. His grin spread slowly, impossibly wide. "You cannot kill what has already been claimed," he said, his voice rumbling through the stone floor. "You can only delay." The first of the creatures lunged. I met it head on, my arm snapping up to drive a silvered spike straight through its skull. The body convulsed, clawed fingers raking across my jacket, then crumpled into ash that scattered across the flagstones. Another came from the side, jaws snapping. I brought the butt of my pistol up hard under its chin, felt the bone crack, then finished it with a consecrated round through the temple. The chamber was chaos, steel ringing against bone, claws scraping stone, the roar of inhuman throats. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, matching the vibration in the walls. The entire place felt alive, as though the stone itself wanted me gone. Gabriel advanced through the melee like a predator wading through tall grass, letting his creatures wear me down. His black blade caught the firelight, swallowing it whole. I rolled aside as one of his swings came for my head, the weapon carving a deep gash into the pillar behind me. Shards of ancient stone rained down, stinging my face. I answered with 3 quick shots to his chest-clean center mass. They punched through, but he didn't even slow. Then the pain hit. A jagged length of rusted iron, ripped from some part of the chamber's scaffolding, had pierced my thigh in the chaos. My leg buckled, and the warm rush of blood was instant. I bit back a yell, forcing myself upright on instinct alone. My vision tunneled, black, creeping in at the edges. Gabriel saw it. His grin deepened. "You bleed like the rest, Michael. All your rules, all your faith, and still, just blood." Another wave of creatures swarmed. I dropped low, slashing upward with a silver-edged combat knife. One fell, its head nearly severed. Another took a consecrated bullet between the eyes. But my movements were slower now, my stance compromised. Every step sent fire lancing up my leg. I had seconds, maybe less. Then I remembered the book. The leather-bound volume weighed heavily against my side, hidden beneath my jacket. Father Heron had pressed it into my hands in the quiet of a confessional 2 days before I left for Rome. His voice had been low, almost fearful. "This is not for killing, Michael. It is for stopping. There is a difference." I tore it free, blood smearing the worn cover. The pages smelled of old incense and dust. My hands shook as I flipped through them, the Latin inscriptions crawling under my gaze like they were alive. Gabriel paused when he saw it. His eyes narrowed, and, for the first time, there was something other than amusement in his face. "That book is not yours," he growled. "Neither was the boy," I spat. He lunged, but I had already found the page. Its parchment brittle, edges blackened by age. The sigil inked there burned against my vision, wrong in ways I couldn't name. My mouth formed the words before I realized I was speaking, the syllables thick and sharp, clawing their way from my throat. The air in the chamber shifted. The temperature plummeted, and every flame froze mid-flicker, turning to brittle waxen sculptures. The creatures hesitated, heads snapping toward me in unison, their mouths working silently. Gabriel roared, charging through them. But the sigil on the page flared, blinding, searing, white light pouring from it like water breaking through a dam. The sound was deafening, a chorus of screams layered over the grinding of stone. I kept reading, the words clawing at my tongue. The light burst outward, striking Gabriel mid-leap. He was thrown back, slamming into the altar so hard it cracked down the center. The creatures shrieked and began to disintegrate, their bodies peeling away into ash that swirled toward the glowing sigil. The floor beneath the altar split wider, but instead of releasing what waited below, the light poured into the gap, weaving itself into a lattice. The hum that had vibrated through the chamber now reversed, pulling inward as though the very air was being sucked toward the seal. Gabriel thrashed against the pull, his claws scraping furrows into the stone. "You cannot hold him forever," he bellowed, his voice ragged with fury. "The door will open, I will open it." The light dragged him toward the lattice. His body twisted, features melting between man and monster, smoke pouring from his skin. He reached for me, and for a heartbeat, I thought he'd break free. Then his expression changed. The grin returned, smaller, colder. "When this fails, Michael, I will be the first thing you see." In a single motion, Gabriel drove the black blade into his own chest. The impact was silent, but the explosion was not. Light and shadow bursting outward in a concussive wave that slammed me against the far wall. My ears rang, my ribs screamed, and the world went white. When my vision cleared, the chamber was quiet. The lattice over the altar still glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The pain in my leg dragged me back to the present. Blood pooled beneath me, slick and hot. I tried to stand, but the muscles refused. Every breath was a battle. I had stopped something. But not everything. The chamber was silent now. Silent, except for the slow drip of blood from somewhere in the dark. I stepped over the bodies, some human, some not. The air reeked of iron and smoke, my boots sticking to the stone floor where gore had cooled and thickened. Every breath scraped my throat raw. My leg throbbed with each step, the warm slick of blood running freely down into my boot. The corridor ahead swayed in my vision, stretching and folding in on itself. The fight was over, or at least it should have been, but something deep in my gut told me I had not won anything. The walls pressed in closer with each staggered step until the heavy door at the far end loomed in front of me. I pushed through it, the hinges groaning, spilling me into a narrow hall. The cold from outside whispered across my face. And then I heard it. I looked up, vision blurred, to see him running toward me. His Vatican coat flaring with each stride. His hands caught my shoulders, holding me upright as my knees nearly gave out. "You're bleeding bad," he said, but his tone was almost calm. That was when it hit me. The scent. Beneath the faint traces of incense and gun oil, there it was, burnt metal, and something older, heavier. The same scent that had clung to Gabriel in the catacombs. My breath hitched. My body wanted to collapse, but my mind screamed at me to pull away. And then Cain smiled. Not the kind of smile you give a friend you have just saved. No, it was slow, deliberate, curling at the edges, like a secret you would never want to hear. His eyes locked onto mine as he said, almost gently, "You're fine. We're here now." The words slid into my ears like ice water. My blood went cold. Every instinct told me I was in more danger than I had been moments before. But my strength was gone. The last thing I felt was the pressure of his hands on my arms. I did not feel anything anymore. Fade to black. The story isn't over yet, and when it continues, you will want to be here to witness it. If you have thoughts about what Michael just faced, leave them below. Tell us who you think Cain truly is, and what you believe is waiting beyond those walls. Your voice helps us keep this story alive.